wow. Thank you very much. We're done. Thank you so much, Kimberly. I'm so humbled, incredibly humbled. I just want to start with a bit of gratitude for being in this space. 15 minutes, this talk sold out. That really makes my head huge. But I'm thankful to be here. I'm appreciative that you are here to share this time with me. So we shall begin. In February of 1969, more than 60 black students at Duke University entered the administration building, escorted out the faculty and staff, barricaded themselves in. You see, since the previous fall, they had been negotiating with the administration in the hopes of getting a Black Studies department on campus. These students wanted to learn about their culture. They wanted to learn from teachers that looked like them. They wanted to learn about things that were relevant to them. But Duke University wasn't really having it. And so, in the process of negotiating, some of the students said, we're spending so much time trying to get the administration to give us something. What if we just put our resources together and did it for ourselves? And so, Malcolm X Liberation University, oops, I'm going in the wrong way here. Malcolm X Liberation University was born out of an idea of black people coming together to provide an institution of learning that was not available in predominantly white institutions, nor was it available in historically black colleges and universities at the time. In the process of bringing Malcolm X Liberation University to reality, several black students from around the country and movements came to Greensboro, North Carolina to do this work. Among them was a woman from Boston, Massachusetts, who left a job at Cornell University to do this work. And while here, she met a man from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who was in the process of organizing black students around campuses around the country. Those two individuals met, struck up a friendship that led to a romance, that led to, oops, me pressing the wrong button in the wrong direction, but it led to me. So, I was born in the midst of pioneers doing pioneering work in this country. And so, as I thought about how to approach the talk today, I looked at the word pioneer and decided that I wanted to explore the ways that the word is relevant to different portions of my life. I've selected a few, and I want to share those with you over the next few minutes. Now, before I get too far ahead, I would like to evoke the words of one of my favorite artists, Ms. Erykah Badu, who once said, "Keep in mind that I'm an artist, and I'm sensitive about my shit." Okay? So, we good? All right. As a young boy, I was heavily influenced by two political philosophies that were important to my parents. One was a philosophy of Pan-Africanism, which understands that as black people in the United States, and black people in Mexico, black people in Central America, the Caribbean, and South America are united not just by a common lineage and history that takes us back to Africa, but also by a common history of exploitation, oppression, abuse at the hands of white nations around the world, not the least of which was the United States. Additionally, black liberation was a very important theory. And it was not just the ability for black people to go to whatever schools they wanted to, or to ride wherever they wanted on the bus, or to live wherever they wanted. But it was the ability to truly be free, to truly have the freedom that every citizen desires in this country, the promise of the American dream, the ability to put your hard work and effort to use and to make better for yourself and for future generations. You see, we can look at folks like Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett as pioneers, but if you ask me, the black experience in America has been one of pioneering since day one. As a people, we have been in a foreign land that has often been very hostile to our experience and to our lives. And my parents were in the midst of this work at this time. They were pioneers who were living out the promise of the Great Migration. Although my dad was from Milwaukee and my mother from Boston, you don't have to go too far in my family to get to the South. And they had gone to the North. They were children of the Great Migration, a period when black people all over the South left the poverty of Jim Crow and oppression of Jim Crow for an opportunity to make it in the North. And my parents had done so. My dad was the first person in his family to attend college, which he did at the age of 16. My mother was working at Cornell University. So there were some great things that were happening. And they had met here in North Carolina to do work for the community. But unfortunately, there's no money in movement work. And so with the young child, they had to make some decisions about how they were going to move forward. And as a result, we ended up in Washington, D.C. Now, if you've ever been to Washington, D.C., particularly recently, I have to tell you, it's a lot different now than it was when I grew up. You see, D.C. had been a predominantly black city since the 50s. And by the time we moved there in the early 70s, it was more than 70% black, and it had been known as, affectionately, Chocolate City. Right? I, at the time, lived in a beautiful culture of blackness in D.C. Black neighborhoods, black businesses, black professionals, and black schools and teachers. And this was a great shaping experience for me in terms of understanding who I was and what my place was in my community. Yet, in a city that is 70% black, the reality was at that time, the wealth, the power, and the opportunity largely existed in the 30% of the city that was not black. And so, it was after my third grade year that my parents began putting me into private schools and schools in the white part of the city. The opportunity to be educated, to have more than they had experience and access to when they were younger. And the experience was an interesting one. On the one hand, I was moving into a new world. I was working with new people. I was experiencing new things, new music, new sounds, new foods, new ways of dress, new speaking. But on the other hand, I was also a bit out of place. Teachers didn't look like me. Students didn't look like me. Things that I was trying to navigate would often be interpreted as bad behavior. It would affect my academic performance. It was a struggle, and for several years, there were times when it was up and when it was down. But I can't say that the entire experience was bad. As a matter of fact, there were a few things that came out of that were very, very foundational for me. One of them was Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I have to tell you, this was definitely something that was a result of me being in mixed environments. There were not a lot of black people playing Dungeons and Dragons, okay? But for me, this was really important because it was a fantasy game, and it was the opportunity to ask and explore what if. What if goblins and dragons started coming here? What if wizards and warlocks started doing this? How would you respond? How could you react? It gave license for creativity. And it introduced me to fantasy, science fiction, and things that are very dear to me today. Another thing that happened was in the 6th grade, my school got a computer. The entire school got one computer, and it lived in our 6th grade classroom. Along with the computer was the instruction manual, which in the back had a glossary of code. And so I would take the manual home and get my notebook out, and I would write code because once a week, we would have time to work at the computer, and I was creating computer code in the 6th grade. So that was my introduction to technology, and is something that has really been significant and important for me even today. But hands down, without a shadow of a doubt, the one thing that influenced me in my life was hip-hop. Yes. Now, I have to be clear, when I'm talking about hip-hop, I'm not talking about what most people understand it as today. I'm talking about hip-hop from a cultural perspective. You see, as this photo shows, hip-hop, which began in the Bronx, was a way for black and brown youth to express themselves at a time when there were no recreation centers, there were no after-school programs. As a matter of fact, many of these kids were living in buildings that their landlords didn't even want to take care of. Yet, they found the opportunity to express themselves and to do so in a way that would ultimately change the world. For me, hip-hop was all about youth culture. It was finally an opportunity for me and other kids that look like me to have a place. It wasn't for white America. It wasn't for adult America. Our parents didn't understand it. They were slow to get onto it. And corporate America really, really took its time before coming in and infiltrating it. And at that time, It was a great, great opportunity, and it was a great form of expression and connection to my culture, not just through the music, but through dance, through fashion, through thought, through all types of things that we come to think of and appreciate as culture. For myself, my connection to hip-hop took a variety of forms. I began as a breakdancer, or b-boy, as the official title would be. I graduated from that, so to speak, into DJing. And I would DJ parties, and I started DJing for rap groups, and then that got me deeper into wanting to understand music and composition and arrangement, so I started writing music for other people, not just rap music, but music of all kinds, and ultimately went into producing and starting my own label and independently releasing music that I wrote. You see, for me, hip-hop was important because, there we go. Of three things. Three characteristics of hip-hop really stood out to me. One was self-determination. This is Russell Simmons. Russell did so much for hip-hop, but it wasn't just Russell. It was Russell, it was Andre Harrell, it was lots of young Black and Latino men and women who said, I may not have the training, I may not have the background, I may not have the resources as other labels and other executives, but I'm still going to go out and I'm going to do this. And through this self-determination, never waiting for someone to give you the permission to do something, just going and doing it yourself, that was very important to me. Another thing that I thought was important about hip-hop that resonated with me was political consciousness. Now, to be clear, all of hip-hop's not politically conscious, we know that. Some of it's a little bit problematic. But those things that were politically conscious did so in a way that has been unrivaled to this date. And so for me, being able to hear concepts of Pan-Africanism and Black liberation and community activism expressed through artists like Chuck D, KRS-One, X-Clan, those were things that really were foundational for me. And it helped to open some opportunities and exposure for me. Additionally, creativity was a really, really big thing in hip-hop. It wasn't about just doing something that somebody else had already done. It's about putting your own unique stamp on it, making it special, making it explicitly you. These three things, among others, were the core aspects of how I understood hip-hop having an influence and connection in my life. And they opened up a lot of opportunities for me. This is a young me with a very young Queen Latifah. I had an opportunity to meet celebrities. I had an opportunity to do business work and work at radio stations and all sorts of wonderful things. I had the opportunity to do recording, and you want to talk about pioneering. So in the mid-90s, 95, 96 this was, music that I recorded, I got some friends of mine who were in the computer science department to teach me HTML so I could put my music online. Now, keep in mind, putting your music online in 1996 means about a 10, 15-second clip that's uploaded, and if they're lucky enough to have a 33K modem, then maybe they can download it in about 20 minutes. So it was definitely a little bit ahead of the curve, but we did it. But you know, the experience, I have to admit, you know, the experience of being a pioneer, of being able to step out and move forward and do things that other folks weren't doing, had varying results. Sometimes things were great. I was in the studio, I was doing what I want. Other times it didn't work out so great. And as happens to most people, life comes along and things change. And one of the things that really had a very defining impact on the way I showed up in the world was becoming a parent. I became a parent very young, and as a result, that influenced a lot of decisions, a lot of things that I was doing in my life. And I wondered at times, I got to a point where, what am I doing? And where am I going? And how is this going to work out? And how am I going to make it work for myself and my family? And just, you know, what the hell? As I thought about it, I knew that there were three things that I really wanted to be involved with in terms of my work. Number one, I wanted to do work that was artistic. I had to be able to ask what if. I had to be creative. Number two, the work had to connect to people. It couldn't just be me making widgets in a room someplace. It had to be doing something that was going to connect in a real way with individuals. And then finally, purpose. I had to know, even if it was just for myself, that at the end of the day, the work that I'm doing mattered, made a difference, whether it was for me, for my family, for my community, or for my planet. So, Keeping all of that in mind, what does it look like to take all of those things into play and do something in a pioneering way? Well, to answer that question, let's go back to DC for a minute. If you were to visit DC right now, you'd find a completely different city than you did when I grew up. As a matter of fact, it hasn't been majority black now for a couple of decades. A study out of Georgetown University released a few weeks ago revealed a very interesting fact, that in DC, the average household net worth of white families is $240,000, compared to the average net worth of black families, $3,500. Yeah, that's not unique for this country. Here in Asheville, we experience the same sorts of disparities on so many levels: economic, educational, health. It's not a good time for a lot of people in this country. You see, what we know today is that health is controlled by a lot of things. Social determinants can impact the way that you show up in the world. Where you live is significant. As a matter of fact, recently it's been revealed that your zip code can have more of an impact on your health than your genetic makeup. And that's because money and opportunity happens in communities. You have social isolation, people who don't feel like they're a part of the community in which they live. That takes an emotional toll on you. If you can't get jobs, if you're not hired, if you're not doing the kinds of things that are necessary to live a full and meaningful life, it's going to have a toll on you emotionally and physically. So much so that we've been able to understand that in every 7 minutes, a black person in this country dies prematurely, whether it's from health issues that could have been prevented with appropriate care, or whether it's from violence. We're losing, on average, around 200 black people prematurely per day. That's the equivalent of a commercial airline plane crashing every day. Now, if a plane crashed, you know it's on the news for a long time. If a plane crashed every day and you're hearing nothing about it, what does that say? So, as we look at health, as we look at the reality of issues that face communities of color, black communities, brown communities, poor and low-income communities around the country, the question and the opportunity came up to ask, well, what if we took a new approach to looking at health in communities? And so, from that, we start with an idea that culture shapes health. When you look at culture, particularly as I mentioned earlier with hip-hop was a culture, and it shaped the health of individuals like me and those that look like me. It provided a way of understanding the world around us and navigating the world around us, and that had an impact on our emotional output. Artists can shape culture. Hip-hop's culture was not defined by the government. It was not defined by corporate America. It was defined by artists. It was defined by b-boys and DJs and MCs and graffiti writers and beatboxers. They were the ones that created hip-hop culture. They were the ones that shaped the culture that had a huge influence. So, if culture shapes health and artists shape culture, then communities, culturally shaped communities, can have change. If you look at culture as the root for a new framework that provides an opportunity for communities to build and impact policy in ways that create social impacts, economic impacts, and educational impacts, environmental impacts that open up opportunities for communities, you're looking at healthier, more robust communities. And artists can play an integral role in that as being catalysts, using social capital to leverage and bring folks together. So you have this continuous feedback loop between the grassroots, the folks doing the work on the ground in the community, and the grass tops, the folks making the policy. And for the past few months now, I've had the fortune of being associated with a very exciting and innovative work known as Project HEAL, which stands for Health, Education, Art, and Learning. Now, Project HEAL began a little over 3 years ago with a pilot program in Smoketown, Kentucky, which is a city in Louisville. Louisville's actually oldest black community. Started shortly after the Civil War. And what Project HEAL did was bring together policymakers and community folks from around Louisville's community to do targeted work that used artists as a way to drive policy change. One really good example of that was when you look at communities like Smoketown, you'll see a lot of what is known as targeted racism. Black communities where advertisements are for liquor, for cigarettes, for bail bondsmen, are for predatory loan programs. These billboards are all over the community. These are defining what your reality, what your existence is. Well, through Project HEAL, artists work with the community to buy and create billboards with new positive messages in that community. That's just one example of the many things that Project HEAL was doing for more than 3 years in the Smoketown, Louisville community. Recently, a health impact assessment was performed that took a look at the outcomes of this Project HEAL work in Louisville and discovered that so many positive things have come about, including increased academic outcomes, increased health, and increased economic outcomes. As a matter of fact, in one particular study, it was revealed that residents of Smoketown, through Project HEAL's work, were able to experience an $18,000 increase in their annual income. If you multiplied that through the entire community, that would be almost $9 million into that community. Think of what communities could do with $9 million. That's a lot of money. I am extremely excited to be working with Project HEAL and to announce that Project HEAL, after piloting in Louisville, Kentucky, is going to be launching in several cities around the country, including right here in Asheville. And I'm looking forward to engaging with the city government, with Buncombe County, and with lots of organizations and individuals from communities around Asheville to try and change the narrative of what is common and to promote a new narrative of health and collective well-being. So as I close out today, I want to leave you with one challenge. Everything that happened in my life came about through people asking the question and exploring, what if? And we're in a world right now where we can focus a lot on what is. But I want to challenge you in home, in work, in your communities to really explore what if. What if you took the time to leverage your experience, your opportunity to make communities and this world healthier and better for all?